Hey guys, Adam here with some 6 quick tips and tricks to help you eat well while maintaining good blood sugar control. So the first tip is to weigh your food and count carbs, as many meals as you possibly can. This will have several benefits. On the one hand, you'll have a pretty accurate reading of how many carbs you're eating, so you can give yourself the correct units of insulin, which will have the secondary effect of reducing your stress after the meal, so you're not wondering, did you go high or did you go low, did you overdose or underdose your insulin, which would, maybe increase your stress levels and increase your blood sugar readings. There are certainly fancy scales you can buy which show you how many grams of carbs are in each food, but I just stick to a simple scale with just the number of grams of each food, and then I use an app, my FitnessPal, which is a free app, to show me how many grams of carbs are in each food item, and then I can calculate how many carbs are in my meal, and then correct based on my current blood sugar and give myself the right amount of insulin. The second tip is to eat large meals that are a mix of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And the reason for that is the bigger your meal is, the slower your body will be to digest the food, so the less likely you're going to have a sharp rise in your blood sugar. Now, obviously you want to talk to your doctor, work with a nutritionist, but in general, you want to avoid no-carb meals, because if you have a no-carb meal and you don't take insulin for it, your body's going to break down the protein and fat that you're eating, and it'll convert some of that to carbohydrates that'll go into your blood, but you don't know how much of that energy is being converted into glucose. So you wouldn't know how much insulin to give yourself and to correct. Whereas if you eat a meal that has proteins, fats, and also carbohydrates, the protein and fat won't get broken down into carbs, so you'll know exactly how many units of carbs you're eating and how much insulin you need to give yourself to correct. Similarly, you want to avoid eating an all-carb meal, for example, because it's going to raise your blood sugar more than if you have a mixed meal with protein and fat, which will slow the digestion of everything combined. So you'll get sort of a slower curve of blood sugar rise as opposed to a sharp peak and then a quick drop. The third tip is to go on a 5-minute power walk as soon as you finish your meal. And this is done for a couple of reasons. The first is that you want to mobilize the insulin that you administered before your meal so that it can reach as many as your cells as possible. And what that will do is that'll sort of unlock your muscle and your fat cells so they can absorb more glucose from your blood, so you're not seeing the spikes as quickly. The second reason you want to do this is that you're burning energy by going for this walk, which will help to curb any spike that would come from the meal. Tip 4 is to space your meals at least 3 to 4 hours between meals, where you eat nothing in between. And the reason for that is you want the insulin that you gave yourself for, let's say, lunch in the afternoon to be out of your system completely before you eat dinner. And the reason for that is if there is still insulin in your system, you won't know exactly how much is there, and you won't know how much then to give yourself for dinner to properly correct. Now, there are ways to sort of estimate how much insulin is in your system, and I know people who are on the pump are able to see that, but if you're on insulin pens, it can be difficult. One rule of thumb is to assume for every hour after a meal, you lose about 1/4 of the short-acting insulin you gave yourself. So if you used 8 units of insulin for lunch, every hour you would lose about 2 units of insulin, so that 4 hours later you would have 0 units of short-acting in your system. The 5th tip is to eat fruit, but at the end of each meal. And the reason for that is fruit can be high on the glycemic index depending on the type of fruit you're eating, and you don't want that to be the first thing you consume because it's going to raise your blood sugar a lot faster. Whereas if you eat it at the end of the meal, after your stomach is sort of more full with proteins and fats and other carbohydrates, it'll absorb the sugars from the fruit slower, so you're less likely to see a dramatic rise in your blood sugar. The last tip is to eliminate the high glycemic index unhealthy foods from your diet. So, things like the potato chips and cakes and cookies and donuts and sort of things we all know as junk food that will raise our blood sugar but won't provide any nutritional help for us. And the way I've eliminated these from my diet is sort of threefold. One is just to not buy them, so I'm never tempted in my apartment to have them. The second is by using the fruit as my dessert at the end of each meal sort of satisfies my sweet tooth. But if that's not doing it for you, there are other desserts you can have, like dark chocolate, for example, that's not as high in the glycemic index, may have some health benefits, and also satisfies a lot of people's cravings. And lastly, what really helps me is just sort of remembering the why of what I'm doing, because it's hard in the sort of day-to-day dealings with diabetes where you might not see the effects of having uncontrolled blood sugar going high, like the 200s, 300s on a regular basis. So if you just step back and think about, what are the potential effects of this long term, and how will that affect my life, and am I willing to accept those trade-offs? So, for example, one of the consequences of an uncontrolled blood sugar is the smallest blood vessels in your body can get damaged. So things like the blood vessels in your eye can get damaged, making it hard to see, and they might lead to blindness in some patients. But also the small blood vessels in your kidneys, which help filter your blood, they get damaged as well, making it difficult to properly get rid of some toxins that might build up then in your brain and things like that. So just thinking about the consequences long term, I think for me at least, make it a lot easier to avoid the temptation of having that piece of pie at somebody's birthday party or a piece of cake or something. Just thinking about, when you're older, what do you want? Do you want to have the ability to see your grandkids, let's say, or anything like that? So just find your why, and I think it'll be easier to avoid those temptations. All right, well, those are all the tips I have for you today. If you have any ideas or tips of your own, feel free to put them in the comments below. I look forward to hearing about them. And I will see you guys next time.